you doing? Okay. Thank you, everyone. It's really great to see so many people here interested in reforming economics education. We're really passionate about it, and I'm thrilled to see so many of you here. So I'm Lawrence. I'm Executive Director at Rethinking Economics International. I have worked for Rethinking Economics for the last 7 or 8 years, and this report that we're going to be talking about tonight has been the work of the last 10 years of the movement, and the last 2 or 3 years really trying to refine some of the learnings from that movement, which some of the participants will talk about. The movement, Rethinking Economics International, is a youth movement campaigning to reform economics to work the people, the planet, and social justice at universities and beyond. Our purpose is to build a diverse movement of people who challenge and renew the practice, teaching, and application of economics to create better economic systems for everyone. So tonight, we're going to be talking about this report. But I just want to say a really big thank you to the students and academics that are listed in the report that have put so much work into this. This wouldn't have come together if it wasn't for students up and down the country contributing to the research exercise. A big thank you to JJ Charitable Trust, who funded this work, to Bedford Way, UCL for the events here, this space, and all the support that's gone into it. But yeah, and then also I've been told actually I need to give the fire exits in the toilets. So you can see the fire exits at the back there, and the toilets are through to the left out there. So the first thing to start with is we're going to hear from Ha-Joon Chang. Professor Ha-Joon Chang is a research professor at the Department of Economics of SOAS University of London, previously at the University of Cambridge, and he's co-director of Centre for Sustainable Structural Transformation. He's published 17 books, including 23 Things They Didn't Tell You About Capitalism and Economics, the User's Guide. He's advised numerous international organizations, national governments, and has been a supporter and leading light for the Rethinking Economics movement. Please give a round of applause for Ha-Joon Chang.
Thank you, Lawrence. Sorry, I need to turn this on. All right. Thank you, Lawrence, for the kind introduction. Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. I mean, I have been with the Rethinking Economics movement more or less from the beginning. And it's that I'll talk about this a bit more later, but it's so great to see this organization continuing and thriving and making real impact. So I'm very honored to be invited to give this opening talk. Yeah, the question was, is economics education fit for the 21st century? The short answer is it is still a couple of centuries behind. Yeah, because you look at the core of mainstream economics, which is taught in economics departments in most universities, is basically 19th, if not 18th century worldview. Yeah? It's based on narrow individualism, is Eurocentric, no, it's worse than that actually. It's Anglocentric, because there's so much that the mainstream economics literature which will tell you that unless you have Anglo-American institutions, you are not going to prosper. So that the so-called legal origins literature by Laporta and these people in Harvard, they have dummy for French legal tradition. So even French are not good enough. It has to be Anglo-American, strong protection of private property rights, the restrictions on executive power of the state, and I mean, of course, these are now thanks to the works of the recent winner of so-called Nobel Prize in Economics, Acemoglu and so on, the called inclusive institutions. You had any idea that this might be the kind of the informative work on the history of capitalism? I'll give you just one statistics. During the Boer War, in which Britain invaded South Africa and basically pushed out the Dutch settlers into the mountains, the difference in the average height of the officers drawn from the upper class and upper middle classes and the soldiers drawn from the working class was 5 inches. This is only 120 years ago. And how can you call a society that produces 5 inches height difference in different classes inclusive? I rest my case. I mean, you don't need to look at anything more. Anyway, so it's Eurocentric, Anglocentric, based on narrow individualism, and then has this delusion of being a science, and therefore want to be technocratic. So deliberately purging the ethical dimensions from economics education. If there's any ethics, it's all about individualism and the self-help and that kind of. Really, that's not even 19th century. I mean, that's like 18th century view of the world, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, So rethinking economics in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis came out saying, look, what we are being taught in the university is not fit for its purpose. I mean, we have not been taught anything that helps us understand this the world, and we need a different type of teaching. So, rethinking movement has called for, well, in my view, 3 key things. One is pluralism. I mean, genuine pluralism, not, okay, we borrowed one idea from Herbert Simon. We stole a couple of paragraphs from Joseph Schumpeter, and we have one idea from Karl Marx, and now we are pluralists, kind of pluralism. But engaging with different schools of economics, different ways of understanding the economics to the deepest level, and then surfacing again to look at this different theoretical perspective together. Yeah, so it's like, I don't know, I mean, some the guy who's cooking British food, brings in gochujang sauce from Korean food, and a bit of garam masala from Indian food, and the Spanish ham into his cooking and calling it world cuisine. So we don't want that kind of pluralism. We want genuine pluralism where different perspectives have equal status, and people are encouraged to make choices on the basis of what problems they are looking at, what kind of political and ethical assumptions they have, and what these different theories were designed to explain. Because all these theories have their historical roots, they are interested in particular problems, yeah? So neoclassical economics was designed to explain market exchange, and it's quite good at explaining it, yeah? But it's hopeless in explaining the class conflict, yeah? It has no interest in the production, you know, okay, there's something called production function, which says that you combine some abstract quanta called capital with some abstract quanta called labor, and according to some technological formula, and at the end of it, something comes out, yeah? I don't call it a theory, yeah? So, you know, all different theories have different strengths and weaknesses, and only when you engage in the different theories from this point of view, you have genuine pluralism. Also, the rethinking has called for engagement with the real world, yeah? And okay, I mean, there was a time in the 1970s and 80s, mainstream economy thought the more abstract and the less it has to do with the real world, the better your theory is. Yeah? I mean, those days are gone, and the mainstream economists argue that, well, you know, we talk about the real world, we talk about Peruvian land tenure system, we talk about the political institutions in China and so on. But unfortunately, this is like what I call the cocktail party real world. Yeah? You go to a cocktail party, you meet someone from Brazil, here's one thing about Brazilian history, and voila, it becomes a paper next week. Yeah? No, I mean, Branko Milanovic, the guy who writes on inequality, described Acemoglu's work as Wikipedia pages with regressions. Yeah? Because the understanding of history is so shallow. It's like the picking episodes rather than having a genuine understanding of how global capitalism developed, how, you know, different regions play different roles in the global division of the economy, how different countries reshape their political economy to engage in different types of economic activities, and, you know, all the bad things that happened in the process, you know, the civil wars and the repression and exploitation. You need to understand real world history in that way. And finally, rethinking has I mean, maybe it's not something that the rethinking movement has explicitly said as often as it's said about pluralism and real world engagement, but I see is the campaign to be deeply rooted in the ethical concerns. Yeah? And I'm not talking about ethics in the sense of, you know, we have to be nice people, we have to be good people. Yeah? I mean, all theoretical positions, however much the mainstream economists try to hide it, has ethical foundation. So we have to engage with it. We have to make our ethical positions explicit. That's the only way to engage with this, rather than saying, oh, we are doing technocratic exercise. And then when you lift the bonnet, under it, you see all kinds of prejudices, yeah? Narrow individualism, you know, denouncement of any collective endeavor, you know, the racism, sexism, yeah. So we have to explicitly engage with the ethical dimension. Yeah? And in terms of topics, of course, in a way, I mean, there's nothing special about the 21st century. Yeah? Because at least since the beginning of capitalism in the late 18th century, the world has gone through transformations, positive and negative, you know, exploitation, conflict, you know, and the technological changes and so on. So, you know, these days there's a lot of talk of polycrisis, but that's a very Western-centric point of view. You know? Because, yeah, I mean, ask a Chinese businessman, do you think there's a crisis? And he will say, crisis, what crisis? You know? per capita income in China since the days of economic reform in 1978 has increased by 63 times. Yeah? So the billions of people in certain parts of the world never had it so good. Yeah? Yeah, I'm not saying that there are no problems. I mean, it's that repressive political regime, there's huge exploitation of workers and so on, but, you know, you have to accept that. On the other hand, if you ask an average citizen of an African country or a Middle Eastern country, they say we have always lived in polycrisis since we can remember. Yeah? It's a perma crisis, if you like. Yeah? So this idea of polycrisis that comes from very Western, especially American point of view. We used to be the biggest guy, and then now there's another big guy trying to challenge us. Yeah? And suddenly we are feeling uncertain. Suddenly we are feeling that the world is not the same. So suddenly we think that we are in a crisis. Yeah? But there's one unique thing about the 20th century, which is the climate. Yeah? No, not just climate, ecological crisis. Yeah? Because it's not just climate. Yeah? It's the destruction of the biodiversity, you know, desertification of sea. You know? And it's the comprehensive ecological crisis. So that really needs to be brought in. I mean, I must confess that until several years ago, I myself didn't take this seriously enough. You know? But we really have to confront this, and we have to bring it into the center of the curriculum. You know? In addition to all the issues that have not been taught and made rethinking students angry. You know? I mean, the inequality, financial crisis, you know? The patriarchy, the Eurocentric, the colonizing view of the world. Yeah? Now, as I say in the preface to this amazing report, I really admire Rethinking Economics for its ability to sustain and propagate itself. Yeah? Because over time, there have been so many student movements all over the world. Yeah? They all had one common problem, which is that today's students are tomorrow's ex-students. Yeah? So, for example, in the early 2000s, in France, especially, but in other countries, there's this movement for post-autistic economics, yeah? Which was really impressive. But then it fizzled out because you know, people moved on. I mean, they had to get a job, they had to pay their mortgage, they had kids. Yeah. And in the 60s and 70s, there was all this new left student movement, which demanded, especially in America, that universities hire Marxist professors. One of whom was Kamala Harris's father, Donald Harris, yeah, who was the first Marxist and probably will be the last Marxist ever hired by the economics department in Stanford University. Yeah? Anyway, but that also fizzled out after that 5-6 years because they didn't think about how to sustain this movement. You know, from the very beginning, we see Yuan Yang, who was the main force behind this thinking. From the very beginning, Rethinking Economics realized that this is a potential problem and made sure that generations of students work together to sustain this movement. Yeah? And lo and behold, I mean, after like, what is it, like 12 years now, you are still here, going very strong, and yeah, producing this wonderful report. And I'm very glad to have been kind of okay, I mean, the secondary part of this movement, and really hope that people who are here keep working together to change economics, eventually to change the world, because economics today plays the role of Catholic theology in medieval Europe. Yeah? is a defining the ideology. So unless we change it, we are not going to be able to change the world. Yeah? Thank you.
Thanks so much. Be heard. Thank you very much, Professor Chang, for your insightful words and eternal support. Who would have thought that the US election would be the second most exciting thing happening on the 5th of November? Thank you for coming today. My name is Ross Cathcart, and I'm a member of the Rethinking Economics UK and international teams and co-lead on today's report, Is Economics Education Fit for the 21st Century? Assessing and evaluating economics curricula has long been a part of how our movement has made change. 8 years ago, we published The Econocracy, a review into the curricula of 8 universities. One of the authors is in the room tonight. We believe that this report provides a much needed update on that book, on what is taught in economics programs, what isn't, and what a better economics education might look like. In producing this report, myself and co-lead Paddy Nelson, who we're going to be hearing from later, analysed the module and course descriptions of 20 universities across Scotland, England, and Wales. We identified a number of key thematic themes that, as a student network, we wanted to rate university courses against, from sustainability and inequality to the theological, not theological, you've got me talking about the Catholic Church, to the theoretical diversity of the content and the extent to which it differs from the kind of broadly considered economic mainstream. So what did the data tell us? Those are some of the themes that we focused on through the report. Undergraduate economics education continues to be predominantly taught on a theoretically micro-founded basis, with rational individuals engaging in markets, analysed and interpreted through mathematical methods. 88% of the 480 modules that we analysed drew from mainstream neoclassical thinking. And this description is even more true when we look at mandatory modules, though it makes up the core of that teaching. Yes, some elective modules engage in a much wider range of topics and perspectives, but their optional status means that there's no guarantee that students will receive that learning. And this is a particular problem when you look at courses in Scotland, where you can drop economics after 2 years, or PPE at Oxford, which we reviewed, the so-called degree that runs Britain, where you can drop it after just 1. When theoretical alternatives to the mainstream are discussed in history of economic thought papers, which are mandatory at only 5 of the universities we reviewed, these courses really frequently take a sort of Whiggish approach, presenting the development of the discipline as a long, winding path to modern economic theory, rather than an invitation to compare and contrast different perspectives. Historical economists and detractors of mainstream economics are, to use Yuan Wang's words from a few years ago, economists in a box, kind of historical artifacts without relevance for contemporary economic analysis. The P word, power, remains taboo in many programs, where there's a real dearth of engagement with political economy and feminist and Marxist traditions. In recent years, there's been a growing call, not just in economics, but across the university space, to decolonize our institutions, recognizing not only that the Western-centric knowledge production in our learning, but also how the universities as an institution have been so integral and tightly bound to the development of the British Empire. The results in our reports were stark, with just 16 of the 480 modules we analysed, devoting 1/5 of their learning outcomes to questions of slavery, colonialism, and neocolonialism. Really integral debates around underdevelopment, dependency theory, the political struggle of decolonisation are largely absent. And the cast of economics thinkers and practitioners that modules draw from perpetuate this problem, tending to be overwhelmingly male, and from the Europe and USA. We are the climate generation. Those are the words of one of the students that was involved in writing this report. What does our future look like on a warming planet? Really integral questions that get to the heart of why people join Rethinking Economics and are part of this campaign. We found that 51 of the 480 theoretical modules that we analysed showed evidence of discussing sustainability and the climate crisis. And yet at many of the universities we reviewed, this learning siloed into an optional module, where climate change is discussed in 3/4 of the courses we looked at. It's done in microeconomic modules, where environmental damage is something to be priced into market transactions. Students aren't given the opportunity to talk about the environment through a macroeconomic lens or engage in some of the really pressing political debates around well-being, around the Green New Deal, around global climate inequality. Those are some of the kind of big picture snapshots that give us a lay of the land of economics education across the piece. But we also did an institutional breakdown. And for that, we ranked all of the institutions that we reviewed into 4 categories, from which we're able to draw some common themes. At the bottom, in category 4, institutions are characterized by a really narrow approach to economics. These universities almost exclusively teach from a mainstream perspective and had really limited engagement with the real world with inequality. Category 3 reflected the sort of median economics education in England, Scotland, and Wales, where mainstream economics again dominates, but teaching of perspectives does take place in optional modules. Institutions in both of these categories have a real poor engagement with questions of the climate crisis and sustainability. Institutions in category 2, teaching outside of neoclassical orthodoxy again does occur when there's modules led by heterodox economists. Economics is connected to the real world, but again, largely through the lens of mainstream economic theory. There are some useful exceptions to note to this category, though. We found a really amazing module at the University of Hertfordshire looking at the political economy of the climate crisis, ecology, and we think it should be part of every course. Similarly, the University of West England brings a far greater intellectual diversity to its mandatory modules, and that's reflected in it being the top category in category 2, a top institution in category 2. However, there were 2 institutions that make up our top category, and we believe teach economics for the 21st century: the University of Greenwich and SOAS. Quiet, please, no disturbances. Have to get security in. The education there is pluralist, critical, engages in ecological sustainability, and embeds real-world teaching across the curriculum. And it was really a bright light in this report, kind of finding this as kind of a demonstration and proof that certainly the authors of the report, but also I think to students campaigning, to academics wanting to change their curriculum, that this can act as proof that this is what a reformed economics curriculum can and should look like. So, where next? From our results, we would argue that in many institutions, studying economics equates to a thorough understanding of the application of modern mainstream theory. Our recommendations start from the expectation that instead, an economics degree should give you, above all, an understanding of the economy that we live in, as opposed to a sort of simpler alternative that we can more easily model. We developed a set of principles. This is a taboo slide. There's too much text in the slide, but it is in the report in the results section, and I'd encourage you to look at it there. But we believe this is a really useful set of principles that all courses can work alongside to ensure that their education meets the kind of standards that we've developed in this report. In addition to this, we also produced 4 recommendations. Our first recommendation is to change the way that students are introduced to the discipline. by restructuring that initial binary of neoclassical micro and macroeconomics. And instead, economics, when it's first introduced to students, should start by asking relevant, real-world questions about the economy that we live in, introduce critical perspectives from across the discipline, and engage with history, political economy, race, and empire. Our second recommendation is to decarbonize, decolonize, and diversify our economic learning. Decarbonize, to teach economy as being embedded in the living world, recognizing planetary boundaries and climate science. Decolonize, to move away from a Eurocentric perspective view of the discipline and bring in questions of empire, colonialism, global inequality, and really make that the core of an economic syllabus. And to diversify, to celebrate economics in all its contradictions, debate, and provide students with the tools for them to really critically reflect on ideas and whether they are, in fact, for the benefit of people and planet. I think the thing to add here is that, crucially, we found examples of all of this in the universities that we looked at. Sometimes it's in specific modules, sometimes it's across whole programs, sometimes it's in other departments than economics, but it is out there and it is being taught. Our third recommendation relates to teaching practices. Now, we didn't go into every classroom of every course that we reviewed here, but our research did highlight some really fundamental problems that we think it's important to raise, mainly around, well, a really narrow focus in content and a real over-reliance on the use of textbooks as a teaching tool. Economics education shouldn't just train students in a very specific set of quantitative skills or give them this really boundary knowledge of how to remember and apply certain models. We want our education to provide a really critical approach and to encourage students to really critically engage with the material and with the big questions that they have about the world around them. Oh, there's the third one. And then our fourth and final recommendation probably goes out to the administration of universities rather than the academics and lecturers that teach it, but to really democratize decision-making over economics education. As a first step, we think that means opening up economics departments so that students can take more modules from across the social sciences. But crucially and fundamentally, it means bringing students and teachers into the decision-making processes around our learning and listening to the concerns that they have. That brings us to the end of this report. Thank you very much for staying with me. There's going to be some questions and discussion later on, and I will not be part of the panel discussion. I think you've heard enough of my voice, but I'll be looking around the edges in case anyone's got any particular comments or reflections. But first, I'm really excited to welcome two of the students that were really involved in this project. Sami from Post-Crash Economic Society in Manchester and Kashvi Singh, who you've already met from UCL, who are going to talk a little bit about their experience of being part of Rethinking Economics and doing this research.
Hi everyone, I'm Kashvi from UCL. So my journey with Rethinking Economics at UCL started almost 2 years ago, and I was driven by mixed motivations that have changed over time. So initially I felt a disconnect between the economics I was studying and the more socially relevant economics that I had imagined when I was in high school. And getting involved with RE was definitely an eye-opener for me because it helped me realize that there is an economics that actually addresses the issues that I care about. And I wanted to bring that insight to UCL, which is why we started the movement here. Now, in my final year, what keeps me going is the amazing community of passionate members that we have across RE, both nationally and locally. And the heterodox nature of this movement, which encourages diverse perspectives and creativity in both economic thinking and advocacy. It makes it feel like a home for people who are passionate about creating better economics. Last year in October, we conducted the curriculum health check. It was a unique chance for me to look at my university's modules from an empirical lens, along with other students, and really analyze how well they prepare us as future economists. having the guidance we needed from Ross and Paddy, paired with the freedom to interpret and present the results, was very empowering for us. And I think it's rare to have that kind of ownership as students. So the experience has made me feel very confident about advocating for the results of the report. And one finding that really surprised me personally was how few modules address the climate crisis and ecological issues at my university. Because to me, these are amongst the most pressing economic challenges of our time. So it was shocking to see them missing from both core and optional modules. It's underscored the need for change and reinforced why we're here, campaigning for a more relevant economics education.
So my first exposure to economics was at A-levels, where despite having a very passionate teacher, there was an extremely limited extent to which we were allowed to question or challenge the largely neoclassical models that were being taught to us in class. Our education was focused on a quantifiable outcome. The purpose of teaching was to achieve a grade on a standardized test rather than to develop students' critical thinking skills or allow us to form our own judgments. And it was most definitely not for the betterment of wider society. And I soon observed that this phenomenon was not exclusive to A-levels. At undergraduate, discipline is broadly pursued because of the career path that it can offer afterwards, meaning once again, in a situation where universities depend on student fees to continue functioning, the primary focus becomes output rather than any qualitative or non-monetary benefit that studying economics may bring about. And me, I've always had a social science inclined brain. So I've always tried to draw connections between economics and other disciplines. And during A-levels, this left me feeling very frustrated because most of the real world context that I'd learned about elsewhere was being omitted from these lessons. Reading Donut Economics was instrumental for me because for the first time I was exposed to the true breadth of economics and I was finally being validated in my long-held disillusionment towards the subject. The book was instrumental also in allowing me to channel my broad frustrations into a real fight for change. So through it, I discovered the Post-Crash Economic Society at Manchester, where I joined a team of 4 students writing a report similar to this one, but just focused on our university in particular. On the state of the Manchester economics curriculum. So the research cemented my prior observations that the stark differences in narratives between A-levels do not change much at the university level. In the whole curriculum, discussions of slavery and colonialism only occur in one single module. There is no discussion of racial inequality. Sustainability is only discussed in 2 modules, and this is only done through the lens of externalities. No mandatory modules include any insight outside of the mainstream economic schools. There's no discussion of wealth or income inequality in any mandatory modules. Interdisciplinarity is extremely limited, meaning economics is taught in isolation from other social sciences, and qualitative research methods are completely overlooked. And I think it's important to say that the omission of these topics is politically charged. It breeds a generation of complacent learners who are not equipped with the necessary critical thinking skills to challenge or question the status quo. And economics will become obsolescent if it cannot remain in the world and applicable to our current world context. These findings laid the foundations for the recommendations that Ross just presented. So of course, writing the report was only the first step of our efforts. We held a launch event on the 1st of May, where a summary of the report was presented to students, members of the public, as well as various members of the economics department, including the head of undergraduate, with whom we had some various notable disagreements with. During this event, we also held a panel with multiple guest academics, including 2 from the Global Development Institute, which is where I study. And we're hoping that this department will continue to support us in our future campaigns and become something of an ally for us within the university. In further pushing the reach and engagement of our report, we're hoping that it will be able to provide the basis for instrumental change to occur in Manchester and beyond. We want our findings to be foundational considerations in the university's efforts to push sustainability and social justice. For our society, this will include campaigning for the inclusion of a new donor economics module, meeting with academics and course organizers to ensure our recommendations come to fruition, and much more looking over to the next academic year. As some of you may already know, 1 new optional module has already been implemented since writing the report, which is the history of economic thought. So there's a success there, but as we all know, this is far from enough. But me, I'm excited to continue working with the Rethinking Economics organization to continue pushing on campaign, and I'm especially looking forward to connecting with students involved in the rethinking movement at other universities. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sammy, Kashfi, Ross, for those presentations. We're going to take a few minutes now where we want you to turn around to the people on your table and just name one of the things that stood out to you in the report, either through flicking it through or anything that's been presented now. Just, yeah, one thing that stuck out to you. Yeah, I mean, some of them we just left. The ones that I told there.
Really good.
Oh, good.
Was it, so am I doing the same thing for the panel as well? So like at the when it comes to the end of the panel, I'm talking about the 5 and the 1 minute.
I think it's okay. I think
Yeah.
that.
Because it's shorter question.
Yeah. So am I
No, I think you're all good. That was good. Thank you. No, it's that thing. It's like. No. What you did. I mean, I think.
Okay. We'll get going again. I hope these chats are hoping generate some of the questions for the Q&A that we're going to have shortly after this panel discussion. So I'm just going to let the panelists introduce themselves because I'll end up doing all the talking otherwise. So maybe I'll just start with Yuan to my left. If you want to introduce yourself and say a little bit about your connection to Rethinking Economics.
Great, thank you, Lawrence. As Hajun Chang mentioned, I'm Yuan Yang. I'm one of the co-founders of the Rethinking Economics movement, and I'm now a Labour Member of Parliament for Early and Woodley, which is my home constituency in Reading.
Hi, my name is Shloka Murarka. I'm part of Rethinking Economics since a year, so not as long. I help run it at SOAS, so the SOAS chapter of Rethink, and I work for Students Organising for Sustainability UK, which, if you haven't heard, is like a spin-off of the National Union for Students.
Hello, I'm Carolina Alves. I'm an associate professor in economics at UCL, not at the Department of Economics for obvious reasons. So my connection, if we're thinking economics, well, it goes, I was just mentioned to Hachun that 10 years ago when I attended my first Rethinking Economics conference at UCL as a PhD student at SOAS. And that was the first time I actually saw Hachun in person after keep reading him from Brazil for a very long time. So since then, I've been following the movement very closely as a PhD student and then as a scholar, discussing heterodox economics and other aspects of alternative thinking.
Hi, I'm Paddy. I have been part of the Rethinking Economics movement for the last 5 years. 3 of those as a student in Manchester, and then 2 of those on the staff team. And with Ross, we co-wrote this report. I know, unfortunately, I'm not working for Rethinking Economics anymore. I'm living in Dublin and studying a master's there. But it's great to come back for the report launch.
Great. So maybe we'll start with Yuan. So it's been 12 years since you and many others brought this movement into being. What do you think is different now to when you were a student, either in the discipline or in your working life, thinking and working with economics in practice?
So I think the biggest difference is, I think, what Sammy mentioned in her speech earlier, which is the community. I started my undergraduate in economics. I did PPE at the University of Oxford 16 years ago. It's strange to think that that is the case, but pluralism keeps you young. And 16 years ago, I walked into an economics classroom, microeconomics classroom. It was taught by 2 graduate teaching assistants. And they set out on the whiteboard the consumption and production functions that we would be looking at for the rest of that course. And from that moment, actually, when they set out those functions, bearing in mind this is the October of 2008, it's the heart of the financial crisis, I thought to myself, why are we doing this as opposed to anything else, as opposed to looking out of the window, as opposed to addressing the world around us? And in my first winter break from university, when I got back home to my parents, who were obviously very excited about their first daughter going to university in the UK, going to Oxford University, they very excitedly asked me what was going on with interest rates, and I had no idea. And it took me a very long time until actually I started working as an economics researcher and then as an economics journalist to actually be able to address the questions that most ordinary people would want to ask you when you tell them that you're studying economics. And back then, in my first year at university, I looked around the classroom and remember thinking to myself, does everyone else have the same questions as me, or is it just me? And over my time in my undergrad, I started to get to know my fellow students more. I think some of them wanted just to get through the course, get their grades, pass the exams, very understandably. And others, a small handful of them, were interested in engaging in that kind of intellectual questioning that I was starting to engage in. What Rethinking has given me since then is the community. And I think, in fact, Rethinking Economics was my first real political community of people doing things together. And there's no doubt in my mind that I would not be a member of parliament today if I had not been part of such a committed, active, and well-organized community of people who showed me that it was possible to do real things and make real gains if you're with a passionate and disciplined group of activists together. And so it really was a political moment of not just understanding what my personal politics was, but also understanding that you can create politics with other people. And Rethinking Economics now in universities across the UK, across the world, has produced so much content and educational content. I think it's shown a kind of model of change that we used to joke about. I think in the early days, some of the post-crash organizers and myself and other organizers from Rethinking in Cambridge and so on in those kind of early 2010s, we used to talk about ourselves as being an encampment built outside the citadel of the establishment of economics. Now, we'd all gone to universities to study economics, and in that sense we had grown up in the citadel. And then one day we decided to leave home and look at the world outside the citadel because we wanted to explore the world outside. And we decided to set up an encampment that we would have these teach-ins, these workshops, these alternative curricula, books that have been published over the last 12 years, and try to create an alternative way of teaching and learning about economics. But at the end of the day, we always wondered what it would be like to change the citadel of economics itself. And Carolina, you mentioned you're teaching economics, but not in the Department of Economics. What would it be like to open up the Department of Economics in the institutions themselves? And this kind of metaphor led us to have a playful way of talking about a theory of change, about the contrast of what can exist outside of the traditional curriculum and outside of traditional departments, but also the need to also engage with those traditional departments who, after all, have the power to credentialize economists and determine who is given the technocratic privilege of being an economist. Now I'm in the House of Parliament. I am back within the citadel. My journey back into the citadel has taken me on that course through the encampments, hopefully building more and hopefully seeing what we can do inside the citadel as well. But I'll end on that note and say, for those of you who are still undergraduates or graduate students getting through your degrees, getting through your exams, I see you. And I had significant questions and doubts when I progressed along my graduate studies in economics, as every Bellman equation seemed to take me further away from the real world. I see you very much, and I hope that you're doing all right and that you're taking time to read some good poetry in your spare time and that you get through your degrees. It's important to get through your degrees. For those of you who are about to graduate and engage in the messy and uncertain world beyond graduation, beyond universities, I think this is the start of your real economics education, when you start working in the world outside of the classroom, outside of the traditional textbooks. And I really hope that you can stay and remain part of the Rethinking Economics community. There is a big community of Rethinking Economics alumni in the civil service and the exploring economics community that we now have, now that we are of an age to have been in work for some part of our lives. There are now more and more rethinkers in many different fields of economics research, in the civil service, in the private sector, and charities and NGOs across the world, and universities, of course, across the world. And it's that community that I'm still very much connected to. And I hope that later this academic year, we can launch that alumni network in Parliament. I hope that we're discussing the room bookings, and I hope that I'll see every one of you who's in this room today in the House of Parliament, because I really think it's important to remain connected as a community that organizes together.
Thank you. Yes, and just a reminder that if you do go on to Rethinking Economics' website through finding this report, then do sign up, and we will be advertising these types of events like this, but also getting involved before, during university studies and afterwards. Shloka, maybe we could turn to you next. So SOAS performs really well in the report. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience of studying there? And maybe, you know, connecting to Yuan's point about what comes after that, you know, what you're thinking about after your economics education.
Hi, that's a very difficult one to follow after she spoke so eloquently. I joined SOAS particularly because of its heterodox nature. So it didn't come as a surprise necessarily. It came as a surprise to my very Indian parents who were like, what are you doing here? But it has been very worth it. But because I joined for that critical heterodox perspective, it means I've been very critical of how SOAS provides its education as well. And the reality is, even though it does very well on this ranking, and it is very pluralist, it's often constrained by the real world, and it's constrained by things like funding. So this year we didn't have a history of economics module or a dedicated module for gender economics, and I was quite disappointed. But we have a new, I'm in my third year now, and we have a new module on contemporary issues. And we had 2 weeks of feminist economics. And at first I was like, okay, so we're doing the ABCs of feminist economics, and that's personally what I pursue. So I assumed I'd be a little bit, I expected to be a little bit bored, but it was nice to see that everyone had to do it. Like they didn't get to opt out of it. And later the same day after my lecture, there was a Rethinking Economics networking event. And I met professors from other universities who had no idea what social reproduction is. And I'm assuming there's people in this room who like don't have that as part of our education, those actual ABCs of feminist economics. So it showed me the importance that, wow, actually they did this, like 350 students, my entire cohort had to learn the feminist economics, and the importance of curriculum being threaded into like curriculum design instead of just an opt-in module. But at the end of the day, the economics toolkit is still seen as like neoclassical economics at its core. So how much ever change SOAS economics tries to make, it's constrained by that. It feels like it has to provide a certain set of skills, otherwise students won't be employable. And because of that, I think unless there's a sector-wide change, it can't do too much. In like, it's doing what it can in its isolated capacity, but I think there needs to be a collaboration of change. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, to have that collaboration. And to answer the second half of your question of what comes next, for me personally, I've been working with Students Organizing for Sustainability UK and the New Economics Foundation to hopefully build on some of the work Rethink has done so far. And the reason we're in this climate crisis to a large extent is the neoliberal policies we have. It is the result of economics graduates learning such neoclassical policies. And we have this ability to have a very disproportionate impact with our degrees, but there's no regulation to how our degrees are taught. And the reason there's no regulation is also because neoclassical economics is against any form of regulation. Like, don't come and tell us what to do. So we're hoping to create a new body that would have like systemic student voice, building on the fourth point that you recommended with democratic decision-making. So instead of just having one student come in and review how economics is taught, we have systemic student voice built in, and we have a program that's hopefully integrated political economy. So there are existing benchmarks for how economics should be taught, but there's no body to actually accredit the curriculums and see to it that it's taught that way. So we're hoping to create a body that would actually fill that role and teach things like ethics for economists or a very broad view of sustainability. And with the hope that we would embed it into the curriculum. So sustainability is embedded into all the curriculum instead of just an optional module, because we've reached a point where we can't opt out of the climate crisis. So we shouldn't be able to opt out of learning about it. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, it's really amazing to always have these events be put together, not just with the staff of Rethinking Economics, but with the students contributing, and also like that call for community that we've heard from both those speakers. Carolina, the report is pretty difficult reading when we're thinking about colonialism, slavery, the history of its connection to economics. You can flick through the back of the report and look at some of the 0% on some of the universities in terms of their discussion in their economics degrees. I find it quite shocking, really, even working in Rethinking Economics for the last few years. But I guess the question that it'd be great for you to help us think about is, what would a decolonized curriculum look like? And within development economics, what are some of the challenges that mainstream development economics throws up?
Okay, thank you, Lawrence. I think it's hard to say what a decolonized curriculum would look like, because it takes us to look into why economics is Eurocentric and how, or Anglo-centric, as Hatchon placed before. And then from there, you start elaborating or thinking why is that the case and how this is impacting institutions or policies or whatever we are thinking at that moment, or in feminist economics or Marxist economics. So I think the main point of this question is to look at economic theory and also the quantitative part in economics and try to understand what that is when we say this is a Eurocentric theory, a Eurocentric approach. And the word Eurocentric is it has different meanings, but also it can actually make the discussion very difficult. So the Eurocentrism that myself and my colleagues, Ingrid Surby and Vika, writing a book on decolonizing economics, the Eurocentrism we are putting forward that we see in a discipline is in terms of methods, but also in terms of how we understand society nowadays in development. So what that means, well, aside from the second aspect is we can't understand modern society without distancing ourselves from what capitalism is. So we see modernization, we see progress very linked to capitalism and capitalism delivering that. And when we are putting that approach forward, we have models to follow in terms of like Europe or countries in the global north that have been able to achieve that modernization, that level of industrialization in other countries they should follow. And that is a kind of rationale that you see behind international institutions policies for developing countries, right? How we can get at that point, how we follow what other countries have already done without even reading Hutchins' book, Kicking Away the Ladder, because very often we have to do something that they haven't done themselves. I say we because of Brazil, of course. So I think there is the question of what is this Eurocentrism? And for us, Eurocentrism is to accept that capitalism is linked to progress, is the only way to achieve progress and modernization of this level of technology. And also that in order for that to happen, we are not really discussing a very aspect of the history of capitalism that is linked to the transatlantic slave trade and also to the violence that comes with capitalism that we don't teach to our students. So there is a question for us is, Eurocentrism is understanding of capitalism in a very positive way, in a naturalization, with a naturalization aspect. This is what capitalism is what we have to do. History is about removing the obstacles to get into capitalism, right? And in that process, we are not really discussing that the history of capitalism is a history that is tainted with violence, with oppression, with imperialism and so on. So there is this aspect of Eurocentrism in our economic theories that's not just development. So the other aspect, as I said, is the methodological one. How our economic theories, which coincides, the one at least that we are teaching in top universities in countries, most of the departments around the countries they followed, because of course they have to publish in the same top journals and so on and etc. There is the question of how economics in its journey from political economy to economics has actually been very attached to that claim of neutrality, objectivity, in a sense that we see economics and economics axioms, economic principles as something that can be applied in different historical contexts. And that principles, that neutrality is almost against the idea of decolonizing, because decolonizing is, or to contest or to move away from the Eurocentric perspective is to consider that there are different standing points for your analysis that may not be starting from Europe as a model, right? So you have to consider other cultures, other ways to build institutions, even the question, for example, of self-interest, which I know is just abstraction and a model way, is something we teach. and it's something that guide a lot of policies. But if you look into other cultures, there are some cultures that don't, the principle of self-interest doesn't even exist. It's very difficult to understand. So how we deal with that? And I'm not pushing us, or that discussion does not push us for a cultural relativism or something like, oh, everything that's from the global south is better. But it's just like from the methodological perspective, what this claim of being neutral, value-free or precise or objective, what it really means if you want to decolonize a discipline. Because it may be that you can't do if you have these principles, because how are we going to consider other standing points? So how are we going to try to move away from this Eurocentrism that is related to how capitalism has developed and so on, and the Enlightenment values that comes with it, which these values are the freedom being associated with this kind of aspect. So I think there is this point, methodological one, how we understand capitalism, to discuss decolonization first, and then to see how that can be applied in each of the disciplines of the tools we are using in economics.
Right.
Is that enough?
That's brilliant. Paddy, so as one of the co-authors of the report, and obviously within the report, there's some damning assessments of many of the universities, but was through doing the research, was there points that you thought actually quite hopeful about economics education? Because obviously we're being very critical. It'd be great to think about, yeah, while wading that through, like, yeah, what came to you in terms of hope for economics education?
Yeah, I think it was in so many, there were pockets of just like so much pessimism of the same problems kind of coming up university on university. But now at the end of the process, I really look back and there's a lot of hope that I've drawn from it. And I think, as Ross has mentioned, firstly, SOAS and Greenwich really served to us as proofs of concept that a good economics education actually does exist in the UK. But also that economics education can be changed. Taking Greenwich as an example, 10 years ago, the department sat down with rethinkers and worked with them to rewrite the curriculum. And that's a real proof of concept that to anyone in the room campaigning for economics education, that it is possible, and that kind of is something that can happen. I think the second thing that we learned, which I was somewhat more to my surprise, was there actually is good economics at basically every university in the UK, or certainly the 20 we studied. There was good economics taught at nearly every university. But by and large, this was actually outside of the economics department. And I know now I'm studying geography, urban geography at Trinity, and I'm talking about economics way more than I ever did in my economics degree when I sat down and just did sums day on day on day. So I think that was really encouraging. We tried to bring that out in the report. When we listed modules from other universities as kind of good practice, or where good economics was used and heterodox economics was used. And more often than not, those modules were coming from outside of the economics department. And more than just modules, there were full programs basically dedicated to economics that have arisen kind of as I would say, in the failure of economics departments to provide good education, such as Sammy's program, the Global Development Program in Manchester. It's a fantastic course. It's full of economics. And I think that should bring a lot of hope of economists don't have to reinvent the wheel. They just have to cross campus and go and talk to their peers in political economy, in geography, or in sociology, to get new ideas on what economics education should be, and also how far better pedagogies can be used in teaching and learning. And I think finally, the thing that brought me hope was a really enjoyable part of the process and part of the research was that me and Ross traveled up and down the country to work with students on the research and kind of crunching the numbers together. And working with so many amazing student activists, those people, the students in this room, are so ready and eager and desperate for a better economics education. And this report alone isn't going to change economics education. It's their activism, it's their organizing and campaigning that is going to change economics education. And I'm filled with hope that that will happen and that they have that drive, and that hopefully economics departments will listen.
So I think we're running a little bit behind time. So we're going to go to questions, and I've got a few more prepared questions that we might field to the panel. Have we got a roving mic person who can help assist? So if you want to raise your hand if you've got a question, and we'll take 2 or 3 at a time. So we'll take this one and then one over there. If you could keep it to short and snappy to the point, and to the panelists, and we can collect them.
Thank you. Do employers, are some types of employers more attracted to the SOAS and Greenwich economics graduate? And are you talking to employers? Because it seems that employers are still looking for the old way of doing things.
Great, thank you. And then there's a question over here. And I forgot to mention, Ross, do you mind joining us in the panel as well, just in case there's a question directly towards you? Yeah.
Hi, I'm a parent of an 11 and 13-year-old. Firstly, I have to say I'm super happy to see these students, especially students at my table too. So very, very hopeful for my kids' education. Hopefully by that time you'll have one the better. My question is, as a foreigner, I've observed the primary and secondary education and the lack of everything that's in this report is exactly the same, even more amplified. So my question is, do you engage at all with pre-university educators and pupils, parents? Because then the machine churns them out after what, like 14 years? And then you have to kind of deprogram them. So what are your thoughts? And
Great, thank you. And then I think there was one at the back here. Sorry, Sarah, I'm making you walk. Thank you.
Maybe this is now a bit of a long question because there's a lot of panelists, but I was wondering if there could be like one book that has moved you or has brought you to think about economics in a different way. If you could name one so that we can get some book recommendations out of you.
Amazing, thank you. So we have 3, we'll take those 3 questions. So there's one on employers, speaking to employers, one on before university education, and a book recommendation. Does anybody want to pick up any one of those questions? Okay.
I mean, because he said like SOAS specifically. So the example I'll take is of sustainability in particular. On LinkedIn now, there's like a 15% higher rate of people looking for climate skills when they're looking to hire students. And despite the slowdown in the UK economy, LinkedIn research shows that normal jobs and green jobs are growing at twice the rate of normal jobs. So in that sense, there is a desire from employers to have sustainability skills. And then there's like Aldersgate Group, which is a coalition of a lot of different industry partners, which are actively trying to see to it that students have sustainability education. Because when they're coming out of it, that is something that's being prioritized, and it's not being prioritized in the curriculums. But then at the end of the day, it depends on what you want to get hired into, I believe, because if you're trying to get hired into a traditional economist's role, then they do to a certain extent want you to have those quantitative skills that, not to say that quantitative skills are not part of heterodox economics, but I hope that does not.
can I
Yeah.
add this? This very quick. I like what you mentioned regarding the demand side. I think there's a question nowadays in the UK, and you can see that in a report by the Royal Economic Society from 4 years ago, and also in Cambridge, why students are going to do economics in the first place. Nowadays, I can say for Cambridge, is basically to work in finance, and you have a bit that goes to government economic service. It's not even private sector. And I think Tom is here to confirm that, one of our students in Cambridge. So I think when you try to change things from inside, but the students, depending on what they want from that place, you know, why you're changing. You see what you face in Cambridge, for example. Well, there's something that they overload the students with work, so they can't do anything that's extra, but just math and econometrics. But if you overcome this, do the students really want some set of skills, or they want actually to be good to be on finance, which is what they need is the quants, the code, and so on. So I think this is the demand side, which is also now more and more linked to why in economics who don't get female economists and so on, because they're not interested in finance and money and issues that economics are not offering anymore. So there's the question of what is economics for, how economics has become so narrow that the demand for it now is something that even if you want to change the module, it may be that the students themselves wouldn't go for economics. And just very quickly, I think the other point is the meritocracy. What I see in the UK is at least at ESRC level or at the government level, government economic service, and also research a little bit in Bank of England, is that this hierarchical, how universities are ranked in the UK and where these people would knock to get their economists. And that would be, Cambridge, Oxford, LSE. By default, there's this assumption that the students who will be there, or the top people who do the job would be there. So how to break this hierarchy of, of thinking that if you want someone to work for the government economic service, has to come from Cambridge, Oxford, or that is also a problem, right? No one is going to knock at other universities' door if they want policymakers to discuss money. For example, they would go to the LSE, is it Money Macro Center or whatever is the name? So I think there is something to look as well regarding the demand side, but also the hierarchy when it comes to the hierarchy in the UK universities. Yeah.
Maybe I can answer the secondary schools question. So I guess there's a few different elements to this. So the movement came out of focusing on undergraduate economics because of how strategic it is to change that course. It's incredibly influential. It's influential to other disciplines. It's taken up by many leading politicians, and it's very much the heart of economic theory that feeds into our economy, our political system. And I guess when we think about changing other parts of society, and we do kind of broadly say that we want to do that, we have to be very careful and strategic with how we do that. And if I'm being completely honest, when I speak to heterodox economists or people about reforming the economics A level, for example, there's generally quite a lot of ambivalence, like, is it worth reforming? Is it the thing that we should actually be focusing energy on? A lot of universities don't ask. I think almost all but one that we know of doesn't ask for an economics A level. So there is a big question there, and it's also very, very influenced by the undergraduate economics degree. That said, we are extremely encouraging of public education of economics. That's something that we hope to do more of, but that we also have a sister charity, People's Economy, that does public education around economics as well. So I think that's also some work, an area we would organise. And on the books is the final question that hasn't been answered.
Since I know that Hajun Chang is an established author, so I won't plug his books further, but a new author and a fellow rethinker, Kahal Moran, has his debut book coming out his second book, sorry, I should say, coming out in the spring of next year, called Why We're Getting Poorer. So it'd be remiss of me not to plug a fellow rethinker's book, and he's better known, I think, for the video blog and podcast that he runs called Unlearning Economics. And I also hired my parliamentary assistant because through he'd watched Kahal's video blogs, and that's how he came to apply for the position. Thank you, Kahal.
Any more books before we take another question?
Well, you asked the book that changed your life, so I don't know if I should say that, but I was very lucky to have a economic degree in Brazil that's very pluralistic, and we're reading everything. And I was very lucky in my first year to read the economic philosophical manuscript of Karl Marx. And it was that really changed me, just because of the focus on labor and how labor is central for human socialization and all this like exteriorization, alienation, and then you go. It was bad in a way because I went through a path that moved me away from economics in a different sense, but I think it's a book that is like, there are different parts there that really make you think that economics and production and being human being is all together and linked to labor. And I don't know, I think that was important for me, but it's heavy stuff. I don't think I understood anyway, but yeah.
I think a book for me that I read at the end of my first year after studying development economics, taught very, very badly, I read The Divide by Jason Hickel, and it really opened my eyes. And I recommend anyone in their first year or any year of development economics to read it.
Well, other academic supporters are available, but I'll stick to the one that we've heard from tonight and say Economics a User's Guide is something I always come back to. And I think it's a really, really good starting point for anyone wanting to understand the economy rather than just economics.
Great. So do we have any more questions? Yes, we do. Okay. You take you at the back there and you as well, and you over here. Do we have the roaming mics? Oh, yes, we do. Yeah.
Hello, I'm really pleased to be here, and I only recently heard about Rethinking Economics. The reason is that all my life I've been interested in economics and social action and involved in the Labour Party. I spent 5 years in the 1980s in Nicaragua, which had a then socialist revolutionary economy. When I came back, I spent a lot of time looking at economics, even though I'm actually an engineer. And I finally ended up writing a book. And so rather shamefacedly, in front of so many economists, I've made it free on Kindle next Monday. This is the book. It's called An Economy of Want. And it's exactly aimed at the sort of thing you're trying to do, but core economics. But as you can imagine, with my background in trade unions, in activities, and in Nicaragua, I care about the South, global South, inequality, etc., etc. And I care a great deal about the environment. So I'm an active member of Friends of the Earth. So if you're interested, I've got a few flyers. There's some copies in bookmarks, and it's free on Kindle next Monday.
Great.
Pacific Standard Time.
Thank you. And the person next. Oh, this person here, sorry.
Hi, so I graduated in economics and management, actually. So I went to business, not policy, but and I turned down the opportunity to do a master's in economic policy here at UCL to enter business instead. But I think a lot about how maybe my trajectory would have changed there, having a much more applied policy view on economics. I'm interested in the panel here in reforming economics education. Have you seen that filter through to reforming economic policy, whether that's through having a more multidisciplinary policy team or applying more, more applied and sociological ideas in economics lenses? Because yeah, it's something I think would benefit greatly from a society, and I don't just mean as having people as treasurers who don't have any economics background, like George Osborne. But yeah,
thank you. And over here, if there's any more questions.
Thank you. I'm Ted. I'm a professional economist from UK Treasury, rather than different to academic economist, simply because I'm not smart enough to do a PhD. Thank you for your research and report here. I just glanced through a couple of pages. Is there any reason why Northern Irish institutions are not included in your research?
Like the Irish institutions, so
Northern Irish.
Northern Irish institutions. So there is actually, so I can answer that now. So there is actually a separate report on the island of Ireland. So Northern Ireland is captured in there. Right. We were originally going to do Queen's University, Belfast in this report, but when our colleagues in economy studies decided to do that, we said, okay, well, we'll just do England, Scotland and Wales. But the results we can actually circulate as well. It's a very, very similar framework. So yeah, so hopefully that will be helpful.
And my second point is that thank you for mentioning decolonization and colonial history. But apart from the history, if we look at today's global economy, China's economy, Indian economy, they are catching up. But unfortunately, our curriculum in majority of the institutions, maybe SOAS is the exception here, it's out of knowledge. We're not teaching or training the students. We need to know, we need them to know the knowledge that they need to progress in the real world. Yeah. Outside academia, they need to use those skills and knowledge gained from the institutions to be applied in their real job.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what's your approach or methods to promote it.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I think we'll just take this question here as well, and then that will be it for those.
So, hello, and thank you. My name is Shahin, and to introduce myself, I work as a senior analyst for the Bank of England. And, well, I'm interested in heterodox economics, so this is why I'm here. I have several questions, but I only ask one because you have taken so many already. So, this is my question. How has pluralism of perspectives, basically, and I don't know how to, I mean, which verb is better explanation, seep into or got accepted or emerged in other disciplines. So in philosophy, for instance, yeah, it's very natural that they explain different perspectives, even though the lecturer has a clear choice, okay, but they try to integrity explain other perspectives, etc. So it seems that it's natural in other fields, or at least some of them. But why it's so monopolistic in economics?
Yeah.
And what can we learn from them? I mean, in the perspective of changing the discipline.
Great.
Right.
Thank you. So there's 3 questions there. So there's one on education policy. You know, what have we seen in terms of how it looks in policy these days? Are we training like a sort of reflection on how we train economists for the problems of today? And the last question about looking at other disciplines and what can we learn from them, and why is economics so silent? Maybe we could just start with you, Anne, and then work down.
I'll take the policy question. Part of my interest in setting up a Rethinking alumni group and getting it really active is very self-motivated. I want to know who to hire, and I want others in the policy world and in the political world to know where to look when they're looking for talented and bright and kind of intellectually curious economists. And you can send your CV into the parliamentary email inbox. But I just came from the Treasury Select Committee, which scrutinizes economic policy, and we had a panel of economists from major think tanks. We had the OBR this morning. I'm sure the Bank of England will be coming in as well soon. And for many of the policy questions that we need answers to, the MPs and the politicians on the panel don't really care about intellectual frameworks. You know, we're not grading the paper for the job market, for the econ PhD job market. We want solutions. And so actually, I think in the policy world, there's much more willingness to engage with different frames, and in fact, not really think about frames at all, because at the end of the day, you want an output, you want something to change and to work. And the more that we scrutinize and ask questions, the more I felt that actually the kind of first order economic solutions and responses to many of the questions that we face today, you could have said that yesterday or even 12 or 14 years ago, are not really answerable purely through the neoclassical model. It gets us somewhere, but doesn't really get us behind underneath the bonnet of what's going on when you're looking at the ecological crisis or labour market inactivity or the crises in health and so on. So I think policy is really where we need to make the magic happen.
I can add something to the policy aspect. I agree that for policymakers, the heterodox versus mainstream orthodox doesn't matter. But if you look from the perspective of the education, I think what I would add is how we break this hierarchy, because the economists that have access to policy, heterodox economists need to have a better strategy of how to impact policy anyway. But I think there is also the question of where policymakers they go when they want economists, which I have already addressed. But the other point here is, if you look at the training that economists at University of Bristol, Cambridge, Oxford are having, they will be skilled. They have skill enough to actually be hired by the government economic service. They can do the evidence-based theory. They will be qualified for that. The applied / modeling, they will be okay for that. They can go to nudge unity because they're going to have the quants. So a lot of the hiring of economists for policy now has to do with quants. And from that perspective, the economists that you be on the top of their game, that you get hired. So that takes me to the other point, which is the discussion of economic policy in academia and how we teach. And that's a discussion that is a coincidence that I'm now hired in an institute which is for public purpose. Oh, I forgot the name of my institute, sorry. But there is a lot of that discussion of how impact policy with a woman, with Mazzucato, that apparently has been doing that very well. And what we've been discussing, how to systematize that knowledge in education, right? And we've been discussing a lot of what is this theory, base theory practice, where you teach, the students come from the master, they come from undergrad, and you can actually teach them to not learn how to do policy, but understand that economic theory and policy are together, right? So there is the question of how, which perhaps something for thinking economics is spending more time, which is this practice-based theorizing, which just now at IPP I've been getting more familiar with, how we educate our students to be able to do that. Because to be very honest, mainstream are doing very well. They have a lot of master that is economic social policy. Even the King's College Department of Political Economy now has a master just for that, and it's basically quants. I applied for the job to be leading this master, and I was desk rejected under the umbrella of that I was an economist. And so actually economists are doing very well in economics and in policy. They have the quant skill, they've been hired for that. So we have to be very careful of how we're addressing this, I think.
Right.
I can address the other.
Thanks. And maybe Paddy and Ross, if you could speak to the other questions, and if you could keep it short, because we're slightly running over.
Yeah, the question just on kind of how we got to the point of there only being one type of economics taught at universities. I completely agree, it's not natural, but it's not even natural within economics. In the 70s, there was a far broader curriculum. There was political economy taught critically. And well, since we've only got a short amount of time, I would recommend reading the Econocracy to kind of trace back how we have moved from that political economy towards a very siloed and mainstream economics, but it's been driven by research funding. But it's not natural, and I think there's lots to learn from other disciplines.
I have to add something to that. This is true, but there's something which goes back to what economics has this power for, say, this is the right theory. When you rely on objectivity, on precision, on math, on one solution, so that becomes like, if you talk, especially in Cambridge, it's an evolutionary discussion. We have the best economic theory ever. Heterodox economics, what is that? It didn't win the debate. So I think there is that narrative of economics right now. The mainstream economics is the best economics. It's precise, it's not ideological, it's not subjective. And that really wins the debate of why, among other social sciences, economics is the one doing well. It's the queen of social sciences because it's precise, it's not ideological, and that also helps to maintain this lack of clarity from my perspective.
Carolina, I think you need to talk about power.
Power.
Because why is this procedure, which really is a fictitious idea, accepted as so legitimate and important? Yeah? I mean, this has happened basically. Economics is too important to be left to the market. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to control the narrative. Yeah. And controlling economics gives you the power to control the general narrative. Yeah. This is what I mean by economics being the Catholic theology of today's world. Yeah. So we have to talk about power there. Yeah.
That's very true. We have, and we together in that case, the hierarchy, the gatekeeping, what gets published, how economists get hired, which kind of economics you're doing, and so on. But yeah, but you're right, as usual.
Okay, maybe we'll leave it there. Okay, amazing. So first of all, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to the panelists and Han-Jun Chang. If everybody could give them a round of applause. And I just want to say a big thank you to the staff at Rethinking Economics, as well as the students, organizers who've helped with this event and also helped with the research. Everybody that's taken part in this, it's really made it very, very special. There will be drinks outside, obviously only for those that are 18 and above. So we will be shepherding anyone who isn't away from that. But for everybody else, there are drinks outside. And please do stick around to ask any questions. We have some staff members on hand if you want to set up a local group. So we've got Aidan, if you want to raise your hands. If you're a student at a university interested in setting up a local group, campaigning at your university, please go speak to Aidan. If you're an academic and you want to change your curriculum, we've got Ross here. And if you want to speak about interviews, press, media, partnerships, or anything else, there is Sarah somewhere. Sarah is there. Great. Thank you, everyone.